I was 12. I don't remember exactly the last day, but I remember we all walked through the house and made sure it was empty and kind of said goodbye to the house and cried. It was hard. It was very hard. I had very fond memories of that house and of the life that we had there. My name is Donna Maxey, and I was born in Albina. I was born at Emmanuel Hospital in 1949. My childhood was very idyllic, and part of that idyllicness has to do with living in Albina. It was very painful. When we had to move, we lost our home, we lost our church, my dad lost his business, he was a barber, and we lost our community. And how they excavated I feel like saying excoriated, the community was, they forced you to take the money they gave you. It was very hard to leave the community. It got wiped out from the Rose Garden, because that's where our church was, right in the middle of where the Coliseum sat, all the way up to Fremont, just about. My father's barbershop was just one of many black-owned businesses that were right there in that hub. There was shoe shine places, there was Arthur Palmer's Hotel, there was the Porter's Club. There were a number of clubs there. There was Citizen Fountain, where the Urban League sits today, used to be a jukebox place where there's this jukeboxes. It's all, if you look in Dawson Park, there's a cupola in Dawson Park. They used to be top of the Rexall drugstore. Every kind of business you can think of, we had in the black community, but they knocked all of those down. With all of the businesses that are on Williams Avenue now, I'm very upset. Those people are not necessarily wealthy. They are not the gentry. They are white people who have a bank loan I can't get.
Boring. I didn't want to play anymore, but
If you look at what is happening, and all the black people who come back to Dawson Park, and I said, do you understand what you're seeing? That people have a strong sense of home and community. And some of these folks are coming from miles to come back to one of the centers of this cultural community. And when given the possibility of moving back into Albina, over 1,000 black people signed up. 1,000.
Man, I've been coming here for at least 30 years playing myself, you know what I'm saying? So they've been doing this a long time.
Long time. Take care, Pop. You got it all.
All right, Pastor.
People are showing you the tremendous pull of community and culture and place and space. And I think that sometimes people can't see it. Oh, that's just black folks having a good time. No. They can have a good. There are parks all over this damn city, man. There are parks do you know how many parks they pass before they get here? Why don't they stop at Grant Park? It's a big park, much bigger than that. Why don't they stop right there? But this place means something. And you can't put a price tag on that.
Hearing Donna and Ron's voices in that video is grounding for me. They are reminders that although the Albina Vision Trust has been conjuring up a do-over for this part of town for more than 4 years, black folk have been thinking about it for more than 75. That's why, after getting a handle on the history of the area, when the Albina Vision team was ready to begin rendering, we started with an African American community engagement support plan. We kicked off our work by connecting with elders at the A. Vale Gordley House in North Portland, and a series of conversations hosted by the Portland African American Leadership Forum and Lakeitha Elliott. Our first public conversations were with elders like Charlotte Rutherford, A. Vale Gordley, Margaret Carter, Ray Leary, Reverend Hardy, Tony Hobson, Ron Herndon, Dr. Karen Edwards. Our first media engagement was with Bernie and Bobby Foster, the scanner. We moved on to a series of meetings with visionaries and creatives like Donovan Smith of the Portland Harbor Community Coalition and Sharita Town, and then we moved on to activists and electeds and academics like Dr. Lisa Bates and policymakers and business leaders and others throughout the African American community. We have engaged with leaders at heritage organizations, including SEI, Albina Head Start, the Urban League, affordable housing advocates at many organizations in the community, and architectural conservation organizations. This presentation today reflects their feedback and energy. Over these 75 years, we've been thinking a lot about displacement, and we know that we've been shoved out of the way to make room for modernity. And we know that we've been run ramshod by processes that didn't consider our collective best interests. Our voices were not heard, our homes were not valued, our communities have undergone destruction in slow motion for a very long time. Yet, we don't want you to think that this is a tragic story. It's not. Our inequitable ways for choosing where we put highways and parking lots and civic spaces, they did not destroy us, because after all, here we are, all of us. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to regard each other in more equitable ways? How can we take better care of each other in urban design? And although framing for discussions like these, ones that elevate equity and social justice in urban design, can evoke sadness and perhaps even guilt, I was very concerned about that. I don't want to hustle my community's guilt for your musing or conversation, and I certainly don't want to get us stuck in a pit of guilt. The Albina Vision team wants to be frank about what happened, but we also want you to act. We want the city to change course. We want ODOT to change its approach to huge infrastructure investments like the ones we'll make in I-5. To embrace what equity looks like in urban design is a hard concept. It's abstract. For us on the Albina Vision team, this is what it looks like. Here's an image from Forest Park looking east into Portland in 1940. You'll note that the highway or the roads are pretty structured. The area that we'll talk about today, Lower Albina, is between the Steel Bridge, which is in the center top of the image, and the Broadway Bridge, which is just to the left of that. And you'll see out a little bit past the river on the east side, the Lloyd District, and how integrated Lower Albina was into the Portland street grid. To give you a sense of scale, you'll notice on the west side of the river, that bald spot is essentially where the Pearl is today. The other thing to notice is on the Broadway Bridge, as it crosses, you'll see Broadway and Weidler make their way as major main streets east into Portland. Those are very important connections to the city. Here's an aerial image, a time-lapse image of some of the changes that happened in Lower Albina over the course of 20 years. There were a number of cross currents that led to dramatic changes. The top left image is the first major expansion of interstate as trucks and goods needed to make their way north to Vancouver. The second image is more expansion on Interstate Avenue. The top right image you've seen before, which is the bulldozing of about 1,000 homes in Lower Albina. That image to us conjured up Eastern Europe after World War II. Those ideas will come up later in the presentation. The bottom left is an image of how that community was regraded because the properties were adjacent to the river, and we all know that from time to time it skips the banks, and so lifting it and regrading it was really important in order to build Memorial Coliseum. The bottom center is what we created. Look at all that parking. Bottom right is the image of the freeway overpasses that we continue to wrestle with today. So you see, for this 15 or 20 year period, we decided that cars were very important in our community, so we built highways to connect drivers through the city. The airport moved from its location at Swan Island to its current location, so I-5 and I-84 needed an exchange. We wanted to park our cars outside of modern businesses and buildings, and so we built all these parking lots, and now we're poking each other in the eye, trying to figure out how to solve the problem we committed. We want you to look at this image. It's as large as Ladd's Addition is. Can you imagine bulldozing that for a sports facility today? To give you a sense of who the people were, you heard Donna Maxley's voice, and I'm sure you know Ron Herndon, but these are some images of what life was like in Lower Albina. Most people know of it as an African American community, but it wasn't always. In fact, when African Americans began to migrate here from the Jim Crow South, it was a largely German community. It was German immigrants who welcomed black migrants at the time who were working in the shipbuilding industries and the really busy economic output that would create modern Portland needed labor, and those folks stayed with German immigrants who lived in the community. The top left image is a jazz club in Lower Albina. Note the people in the audience. At this time in the United States, there were murders in the South. Emmett Till was killed right around this time for looking at a white woman, and look what was happening in Portland in bars. And to give you a sense of how old those people would be today, the young woman in that image would be in her 80s. So this isn't forever ago. You'll notice the barbershop on the top right, that sort of image of what Donna Maxley's father's barbershop would have looked like, and then stores that were in the area. Again, look at the storekeep there. Here's an aerial image of Lower Albina today. A few thoughts for you. Look at the flow of the river. We filled it in and pinched off the river. What we've learned is as we treated each other, we treated the river at that time. Look at the scale of the buildings in this image. They almost look like tumors in the cityscape. Look at Interstate Avenue adjacent to the river, the freight rail, the freeway. But more than anything, look at how much space there is in there unoccupied. Cumulatively, this is 94 acres of Central City real estate. So I'm going to start to move a little bit faster. If I'm moving too fast, you can raise your hand or bark at me, okay? I promise I'll respond. The Albina Vision Trust team got together more than 4 years ago to begin to vision a new way of thinking about this Central City neighborhood. 94 acres in the Central City, adjacent to the river, within walking distance of downtown. Instead of coming up with a specific development vision for the community, we thought it best to try to define values that we'd like to see reflected no matter who ended up developing it. We could either sit and watch it change or influence it changing over time. So we came up with these 6 values, and I'm going to tell you what they are. The first is that we wanted it to be a place where people live, work, and play. So we looked around the world at communities that allow those things to be contained in a community. The second was that we wanted to be comfortable talking about the history of the place, how we harmed each other, and to monument that and not be afraid of it. We were really inspired by Berlin and in Ireland and how they've talked about some of the really more painful parts of their history. The next was that we wanted to reconnect East Siders to the river. There's no major waterfront park on the east side of the city. So we looked at other cities that have major infrastructure adjacent to rivers and came up with some ideas. Next, we thought we want arts to be a part of the process. That neighborhood was lively, it was full of creative people, and you didn't have to be rich to partake in the creative arts. So we looked around the world and found a lot of inspiration that you'll see in some of our design work. And this is the most difficult thing to say. We had to be intentionally remarkable in how we destroyed that community, and we believe we have to be intentionally remarkable in how we rebuild it, how we imagine to care for each other, how this part of the city stitches our communities back and reconnects us to the river. So you'll see that some of this is big thinking because we want to be big and exceptional in how we live together in the city. Abstractly, until 1950, the city grid was standard. You saw that 1940 image. In the 50s, we destroyed it and created these really large civic buildings with parking lots. And what we're proposing for the future is instead of focusing on what happens inside those civic buildings, let's design a community around it, and that will inform what happens inside the buildings. We don't want to get stuck with trying to figure out how to manage Memorial Coliseum in particular. Moving on to some of our design images, you'll see in the lettered areas some of the biggest challenges that we had in thinking about a new urban design. That section D that runs across the center of the image, that's the highway that we'll talk about today. Section B is us thinking, how do we connect people across Broadway to return it to the main street that it used to be? Sections A and B, right on the river, are us saying, how can we connect the East Siders? How can we give the East Siders a front porch to the river? And then down in E, we thought, how can we connect this community to this amazing conference space that we have just south of there? This is what we came up with at a high level. We solved some of the connection issues to the north by relocating parking underneath some of the green space, and I'll show you a lateral image of that later. We reconfigured some of the spaces so that they would become developable plots for entrepreneurs. We set up a green space framework that's large enough in scale to counter the huge size of the civic spaces. And then, in addition to that high-level thinking, we thought, how can we re-stitch this community to the east in the Lloyd District and re-stitch it north to Upper Albina? This is what we've come up with. This is an image of a platform looking west from the Memorial Coliseum. The grade is such that we can actually cap over interstate and the railway and connect people to the riverfront with this patio. To give you a sense of the scale of the space that's unused in Lower Albina, we've generated an image of what the waterfront park might look like. In this image, there's a spire. That's our attempt to illustrate what a monument might look like to the history of that community. We also added people in so that you can have a sense of the scale of this. Right now, this is practically unused space in the central city. This image right now, if you were standing in this spot, you would be looking at a parking garage right on Broadway. Right now, we use those garages to support capacity at the Moda Center and the Memorial Coliseum, but if you take those garages out and put the parking underground, it unlocks the surface level for pedestrians and for bicyclists. It also gives you a chance to see how much housing and commercial space can fill in that community. Some of the housing advocates we spoke to in the beginning thought that the buildings looked so nice and new that they wouldn't be affordable. So we've tried to put into this image indicators that this is a diverse and economically and racially diverse community. You'll see the flag of Liberia, which was my joke to put in there. If any of you guys know that flag up there, that's Liberia. And we added in some indications of a new future. Those boys at play are black and brown, and we put them at play in the town square to signal that they're loved and safe and respected. This image is north of Broadway, where the Portland Public Schools site is today. As the design steps up north of Broadway and back into the neighborhoods, we had to reduce the density of the construction so that it felt it could stitch back or step down into single-family housing to the north of there and to the east of there. You'll note the diversity in this image of age, of race. We tried to signal differences in socioeconomic status because we want to push us to imagine a more diverse future for Portland. This is our image of how equity plays out in urban design. Thank you.